Hey all, this is Redditosker, and Armored Core is over. It's done. It's been out for a while, and there doesn't seem to be any plans for DLC or additional content, which means it's time to eagerly anticipate Elden Ring's DLC. It could come at any moment. We have no precedent to predict this kind of thing. We really don't have any idea when it's coming or when it's going to be announced, because all other DLC from Software's Souls games have followed a different trajectory. Souls games DLC do not typically take very long to come out. Even in the most extreme example, Dark Souls 1, the Artorias of the Abyss DLC came out 11 months or so after the game. But for Elden Ring we get an announcement at 12 months, and basically no news or acknowledgement after that. Typically after an announcement, it's 2 months until release. They announce the game, they give a release date, and it's like a month or two. It's always been like that if I'm remembering correctly. So because this circumstance deviates so much from past examples, there's really no predicting it accurately until we get more information from Bandai Namco. But let's do it anyway. I think it's coming next year at around the anniversary mark, 2024. That's what I think, that's what I'm hoping for. The DLC will get a re-announcement that reveals the release date at the Game Awards, and then sometime next year, February-ish, the DLC will finally release. It's not much to go on, but a couple of things that point to a Game Awards announcement is that From Software has been announcing their important stuff at big events like this. The Armored Core 6 announcement was at a big event, the Elden Ring announcement was at a big event, and From Software already has a big history with Keighley, so it would just make sense. Plus, Jeff Keighley has been to the From Software offices recently. He put out a tweet on September 26th saying it was very special to spend time with From Software PR and see the brand new office, and the team's well-earned the Game Awards statues. Thank you for the hospitality. So, he's gonna have it. He's got it. It's not much, but I think that's enough to convince me that the Game Awards will be where the From Software DLC will be announced. This is kind of teasing. He's mentioning the Game Awards, he's mentioning the awards that they've gotten in those awards before. From Software has this good working relationship with Jeff, so if they wanted to announce the DLC at the Game Awards, they absolutely could. And there's no reason for them not to want to. That's a huge event, there'll be a lot of eyes on it. If you wanted an announcement, that's where you want it to be. Now, I've seen some people speculate that the game doesn't even have to wait till next year to come out. The DLC could come out sometime this year, at late 2023, December, November. These are fans that have had an extra generous helping of copium. My instinct is that they're wrong, but like I said, without a lot of examples, I can't really say that they're wrong for sure. What I can say that, for me personally, I don't even want it this year. I don't want the Elden Ring DLC coming out in 2023. This year has been more than sufficient. Just the big releases alone have kept me occupied throughout the year. I haven't even gotten through the big and moderate-sized games that looked interesting to me. And I've certainly not had any opportunity to check out some of the smaller, less well-known things that might pique my interest. So I'm not worried about it. I'm not worried about any of it. I'm busy. Of course, if it does drop, I'll drop everything to play it. But personally, I would like some space to breathe. I don't want it right now. Give me some time. Let me relax a bit towards the end of the year. But now let's speculate on what the DLC could have and what we want it to have. I think the first thing it needs, like the first prerequisite, is that it needs to be huge. It needs to be gigantic, and it'll probably be gigantic. I believe they started working on the DLC on April of the same year that Elden Ring was released. So by the time it comes out, it could be almost 2 years or more than 2 years that they've been working on it. So if anything, it would be surprising if it wasn't just enormous. In the announcement tweet, they called the DLC an expansion. They didn't say DLC, they called it an expansion. And while there's no set-in-stone definition that differentiates an expansion from a DLC exactly, I do think people have an understanding that when they say expansion, they mean something big, something sizable, that the base game is being expanded upon to a significant degree. Plus, the main contrivance of Elden Ring is its size. You walk out into Limgrave, you see the size of the world around you. You could spend 10 to 15 hours or more in Limgrave by itself, just wandering around and being impressed at how much there is. And then as you go further and further, you get more and more pieces of the map, and you realize, man, this world just keeps getting bigger, it's expanding. I thought I understood how big this world was, but I had no idea, it just keeps getting bigger. You know, you go into the Siofra river well, and then you go down and you see, oh, there's a whole underground network. You see this cave ceiling and what looks like stars. And again, your mind is blown. You have no idea how large this game actually is. That was a big point to Elden Ring, and typically in the DLCs, they take the best parts of what was good in the main game and refine those things in the best way that they can for the DLC. So given all this DLC isn't going to be a piddly $15 DLC. No, this is going to be a $40 at least expansion. I'm really expecting it just to be enormous. So I'm thinking an entire new zone with at least 2 large legacy dungeons. Legacy dungeons bigger even than the ones that they have in the base game. Bigger than Stormvale, How do you... Hang on. Bigger than Leyendell. I forgot how to pronounce it for a minute. Bigger than Leyendell. I want bigger and better than that. Stormvale and Leyendell are among my favorite dungeons that From Software has ever made. They are really great examples of why From Software is the king of level design when it comes to this kind of game. Apart from the legacy dungeons, there should also be 1 or 2 smaller explorable areas, something like Morn Castle, that's not really a legacy dungeon, but it's somewhere in between. And then of course all the mini dungeons like the caves and the tombs and all of that. This is probably an unpopular opinion, but I like the mini dungeons. I think the mini dungeons are fine. For me, it's an excuse just to do more things. I like the gameplay in Elden Ring, and the mini dungeons give me an excuse to engage in more gameplay. If anything, I wish they were longer and harder. They remind me of the Chalice dungeons from Bloodborne, another unpopular thing that I liked a lot. I liked the Chalice dungeons because I liked navigating these samey looking environments. It's one of the few situations in which I would use the coins, like the prism stones, to mark locations that I've been before so I can explore locations I haven't been before. Actually, I also did that in the Subterranean Shunning Grounds, which I like a lot. I don't know if that area is considered a legacy dungeon by the community on its own or if it's part of Leyendell, but if it's its own legacy dungeon, it's one of my favorites. You know, I can already hear the boos. I can already hear people booing. I can already see people typing in their comment section. You know what, screw you guys. I hope there's tree sentinels everywhere. I hope the mini dungeons are bigger and more expansive, harder to navigate, more tedious, less fun. I hope there's crucible knights on every corner. I hope there's ulcerated tree spirits in every... Alright, another thing we need is more weapons. In Dark Souls 3 and the Ring City DLC, they gave us some of the nicest weapons in that DLC, including all of my favorite stuff. The Ringed Knight Spear, the Ringed Knight Sword, the Aquamarine Dagger, that stuff was great. For anybody that doesn't know, the Aquamarine Dagger was a little dagger that you could hold down the Weapon Art button to transform its moveset from the normal dagger moveset into a completely unique straight sword moveset, and it looks like a little lightsaber crystal. It was so cool, the moveset was completely its own, and when I used it, it wasn't that popular in PvP, so I would use it for duels and invasions, and since it wasn't that popular, people weren't accustomed to its moveset. It was so much fun. For the really cool, unique weapons in the DLC, what I would like is something like the Aquamarine Dagger that transforms its moveset like this. Actually, it's almost like a trick weapon now that I think about it from Bloodborne, in that its attack style shifts radically depending on which form of it you're using. So I want something like this, and I want spell-slinging weapons. I want swords and stuff that can cast spells like we had in Dark Souls 3. You know, in Dark Souls 3 and in Dark Souls 2, there were specific weapons that could also be used as spell tools. My favorite weapon in Elden Ring is the Carrion Knight Longsword. I love that sword, it looks fantastic. It has a very cool, unique R2, and it has a glintstone in the sword. So from its appearance to its description to the fact that it actually has a glintstone in the sword the way staffs do, I was positive that it would be able to cast spells with it. Maybe even have it have the effect where the sword-like spells would do more damage if you cast it with the sword. But no, it's stuck to Carrion Grandeur, and that's the only Ash of War it can have. It scales with strength and intelligence, which is not great. So in the DLC, I definitely want this corrected. Like the curved sword in Dark Souls 3 that casts pyromancies, the Heisel pick that casts sorceries. Give me a shield that does miracles. And while From Software's at it, they should make my favorite sword stronger. Carrying Grandeur needs to do more damage. I think it should have more hyper armor. It should scale almost entirely with magic. And it should let me change the Ash of War, at least to only other Ash of Wars that are carrion related. At least in that way I could pretend that it's casting a spell. I could pretend that the sword has different types of magic. And actually, speaking of magic, we need more of certain types of magic and weapons associated with that type of magic. There's currently only one Madness weapon in the game and a shield, I guess, that you could use as a weapon if you wanted to. The Madness build, people are constantly complaining about it, and I think they're right, there should be more, but I don't think there should be that many more. Just a few more. Maybe two more Madness weapons. I was going to say 3, but no, they don't deserve 3. There's also a severe lack in certain types of spells and incantations. I think there should be at least one new spell or incantation for every type of spell and incantation, but some of them need them more than others. For example, maybe there could be a few more carrion sorceries or regular sorceries, but they already have a lot, whereas Briars of Sin spells only have 2. And those are already not great, they're difficult to synergize with since they use faith. There's only 4 blood incantations. They definitely could use some more. I really like the Blood Flame aesthetic, and I'd make a build around it if there were more Blood Flame spells or weapons to work with. The same thing is true for the Black Flame incantations and weapons. They just need more. I'd also be okay with more ways of inflicting Death Blight. I know that it's overpowered, and it would probably be abused in PvP if there were lots of sources and it was particularly strong, but it never really got its day in the sun in the base game. There was never really a way to inflict that on people that was either overpowered or even effective, apart from that one glitch with the immolation. So I'd be happy to see Deathblight even if it starts off being overtuned and they have to rein it in future updates. I think that's it for the incantations and weapons. Basically add things to categories that are neglected right now. Now, let's talk about PvP. For PvP, what I want is simple. It's what I've always wanted, it's what I continue to want. I want covenants. And I want at least one area, maybe one of the large legacy dungeons, in which you can get solo host invaded. It'd be optimal if they also took the time to increase the number of participants possible in a single game. So in Dark Souls 3, you could be invaded by 3 people, I think maybe even 4 people. I think 3 people maybe was the max. And with the phantoms that you could get on your side, a game could have potentially 6 people. You know what I miss? Fight clubs. I miss fight clubs. In Dark Souls 3, you could go to areas, specifically after Pontiff Sullivan, and people would drop their red signs there. Hosts would use the dried finger and summon tons of phantoms as enemies to fight. There was an etiquette around it that most people respected. Nobody just attacked the host. The phantoms would go into the ring and fight each other, while the other phantoms and the host spectated. It was great. Sometimes you'd have a particularly skilled player go through 5 or 6 phantoms at a time before he goes down. Or sometimes the host thinks he's a badass and he summons people specifically so he can fight them one at a time, while people in the background wait. You can't really do that anymore with the way Elden Ring set up the game. I think you can only have 2 red phantoms in at a time, and that's not a fight club. That's nothing. Another benefit of this large player count is the actual Covenant invasion areas. So you had the Aldrich Faithful and the Farron's Watchdogs in Dark Souls 3. And if you enter those areas, you'll start getting invaded by members of those Covenants. Now the way that the Covenants worked is that Covenant members were way less strong than hosts level-wise. That's always true for invaders. They're likely to be of a lower level than you, but it's especially true for Covenants. The game will potentially match you to people that are far higher level than you are. So the best area for this was the Aldrich Faithful area, because by the time you get to that area, you're not in the low levels anymore. Your build is more or less getting there or settled. You're at the point where everybody's doing big damage. So what people would do is you'd have a host, sometimes he'd go by himself, More often he would bring a friend or two, and they'd progress into the level. And then they'd use the dried finger so they get constantly invaded by Aldrich Faithful. And it was a game they'd try and kill as many of the Aldrich Faithful as they can. And invading these types of people was the most fun I've ever had in Dark Souls PvP. There is nothing like the feeling of coming into one of these invasions, seeing that there's already a fight breaking out, going down to it to try and kill a phantom or the host, but things don't go well, your fellow invaders die, you run back to the Silver Knight enemies at the top, and use them as either a deterrent, or if they're going to push through anyway, use them to try and kill off an enemy as they're fighting you and the Silver Knights. And you do this to buy time for more invaders to get summoned. Often when the host is at a disadvantage, he'll run back to the start and try and summon more phantoms. He'll equip the thing that summons the blue phantoms. And so these fights could last forever. And if you're a skilled invader, you can survive several waves of reinforcements before you finally take down 1 or 2 or 3 or kill the host. It was the best. And nothing comparable exists in Elden Ring. This is not good. So what I'm hoping for is covenants like we had in Dark Souls 3, where there is a section in a legacy dungeon that is a covenant invasion area. And before you kill the boss of this section, you can be invaded whether you have a phantom or not. Here's the thing, I miss getting invaded. As a solo player that doesn't co-op very much, there's not really any opportunity for you to get invaded properly. We do have the Taunter's Tongue, but that's useless to me, that's not what I want. You see, there's a difference. A proper invasion happens by surprise. It happens when you're not expecting it. This is how it's supposed to be. It happens in an inopportune moment. You're already struggling dealing with the enemies that are in front of you. You're low on healing, low on flasks. It's the first time that you've done this dungeon, and this is the furthest that you've gotten. You don't know how far to the next site of grace, and as you're trying to finish off the enemies in front of you, you see it at the bottom of your screen. You've been invaded by Enormous Father 32. You need to hurry up and deal with these enemies here. You don't know where he is. You don't know where he spawns at. You kill the NPCs, and now you have to make a decision. Do you push forward into the level, hoping that the next site of grace is nearby? Do you go back and fight him in an area that's clear of enemies? Or maybe you go back to the last bonfire. That way, at least if you die, your souls will be right there. Maybe you decide to hide as a piece of furniture and set up an ambush and try and get the advantage in the fight. Or you could post up in an area where you think that the enemy will walk by a ledge that you can knock him down from. See, that's an invasion. That's what invasions looked like in my day. And that's still what invasions look like if you have a co-op partner. But if you're solo, you don't have that. You have the Taunter's Tongue. If you're using the Taunter's Tongue, that's not an invasion, because you're inviting them in. You're just dueling at that point. It's the duel where both people are allowed to heal. If I wanted to duel, I'll go to the arena. I don't want to duel. I want to get fucked up. I want to get into interesting encounters. I want to lose. I want to be inconvenienced. I want to get ambushed. I want to have to deal with annoying invaders that hide behind enemies. And I also want to win. I want to get into a situation where I'm at a disadvantage, where I got ambushed, where I'm surrounded by NPCs and the Phantom. And then sometimes I get through it. I kill the Phantom, I kill the NPCs, I get through the situation, I overcome the ambush. And look, I'm not asking for the entire DLC to be that way. I'm not even saying a whole legacy dungeon. That'd be cool. Maybe. But no, not even a whole legacy dungeon. One section, one level inside the legacy dungeon. One spot where I can get what I want and be invaded as a solo host. That's all I'm asking for. Okay, let's talk about the most important thing, the story. What do we want out of the story? I've heard a lot of different things that people have mentioned. They want Mikola DLC, they want Godwyn, they want Melina, they want to go back to the past, they want to fight Radon in his prime, things like that. And all that sounds very nice, but it's not what I'm worried about. I don't actually care about the particulars of what's going to be in the DLC. I trust that From Software and Miyazaki will do a good job with that. The only thing I want is very specific. I want answers. I'm a large lore enthusiast when it comes to Elden Ring and Dark Souls, and I think I have a very good understanding of Dark Souls' theme, its story. But the same is not true for Elden Ring. That has me very confused. I don't know, at least I don't think I know, what the big ideas of Elden Ring are. I don't think they're the same as the ones in Dark Souls. I think the story of Elden Ring is metaphorically representing something, and I don't know what that something is, because I don't know what each element of that representation is supposed to be. What I'm hoping for the DLC is that it makes things a lot more clear through either intentionally making things more clear, or just by giving us more information we can extrapolate better. We can make connections that we couldn't make before. Just the fact of there being more item descriptions, more bosses, more things to see, it can finally allow me to make the connections in my head that I need to actually extrapolate the story, the theme. Now, I've often heard from people that maybe the DLC isn't going to give us answers, it'll just present more questions that'll be even more confusing. And there's this idea that the DLCs are always like that. I don't know how common this impression is in the community, but I definitely hear it quite a bit. And it's untrue, it's wrong. The DLCs to Souls games always, 100% of the time, reiterate the themes of the main game and make the central theme easier to understand. In Dark Souls 3, that was explicitly what it was trying to do. In interviews before the DLC came out, Miyazaki talked about how the DLC was specifically representing the main theme of the main game from a different perspective, so that you could contrast the two and extrapolate the main story of really the whole series, what was going on with the whole series. The final DLCs, by his own admission, were trying to make the series easier to understand. It wanted people to get the point if they hadn't gotten it yet. The Dark Souls 2 DLC was the same way. When they introduced Aldia doesn't beat around the bush at all, basically just tells you what the theme of the game is. All of the DLCs are like this, they have always been like this, and I think there's a good chance Elden Ring will be like this as well, just from how long it's been and the size I expect it to be. Because with the Elden Ring lore, there's just so many gaps, there's so much confusion, so much disagreement on what exactly even is going on. Like, forget about the themes, forget about the things that I care about. Just explicitly what's happening, there's disagreement about even that. I'm not convinced that Marika didn't have anything to do with the Night of the Black Knives. And I'm not convinced that she did either. I have no idea. There's evidence for both sides. With how big I expect the DLC to be, and the fact that they started development soon after they finished Elden Ring, I think the DLC was always planned, and that it'll make things a lot more clear. There is an expansion-sized hole in Elden Ring's heart that needs to be filled. Now, I admit, I might be coping. This whole rant could be cope, because I didn't understand Elden Ring's theme, its story. After examining it for many hours, I slunk away defeated. And so my hope is that maybe it was uninterpretable. Maybe the key information just wasn't there, and we've all been spinning around in circles. And so maybe I wasn't stupid for not getting the story. Maybe the key elements of the story that I'm looking for weren't in yet, and they plan to put them in the DLC. And so if the DLC comes out and it does elaborate on the story, and I get it, I will feel very redeemed. I will feel very, very redeemed if that happens. Finally, the last thing I want, bosses. I want strong, difficult bosses. I want the DLC to be brutally difficult. The DLCs always take into account that you're at the end game, really. And so I want the bosses that populate this endgame DLC area to just be so hard, with at least one being even more difficult than Melania. Ooh, they should also have a boss that's one of the big spectacle bosses. They have gotten a lot better at the spectacle bosses over the years. In Elden Ring they had Rykard, and Rykard's the best example of that kind of boss they've ever done. In Armored Core 6 they did the worm boss fight, and while I don't think that matches up to Rykard, it's still nowhere near as good as Rykard. It's a good, interesting deviation of the same kind of concept, where the boss fight is more cinematic than it is technical. Finally, I want whatever is the final boss of the DLC to be the best boss From Software has ever made in one of the Souls games. In the Ring City DLC for Dark Souls 3, that was Gale. Gale was really great. His moveset in the first phase, his second phase boss transition, I think he even has a third phase somewhat, but it's not a cutscene transition. And for many people, Gale is their favorite boss. It's the best boss, it's one of the most memorable. The fight and the scenes are beautiful, they're difficult, they're cinematic, they're memorable. It is not a wonder that so many people like Gale. I want something similar for the DLC boss. I want to make a poll after the game comes out and ask what's the best Souls boss, and I want that boss to win. I want that boss to win. I want most people to come to a consensus that that is the finest boss they've ever made. In a lot of ways, I think I want Dark Souls 3's DLCs again. For example, Midir would also be a cool boss to have, something like Midir from Dark Souls 3's Ring City DLC. What I like about Midir is that there's not really a point in bringing phantoms to the Midir boss fight. If you bring phantoms to the Midir boss fight, you are more likely to lose. Midir is difficult, but he's also very predictable. His hitboxes are very tight, and if you're by yourself and he's only focusing on you, then the boss fight is very manageable. But he's so huge, his health is so high, and he does so much damage, that if you bring phantoms, and those phantoms scale him up so that his HP is higher, and they draw his aggro so that his attacks become unpredictable and weird, you're much more likely to die. And all of your phantoms are very likely to die. They're all going to die, leaving you by yourself, dealing with a much higher HP'd version of this boss. So, from bosses I want the hardest boss ever, the best boss ever, a cinematic, Rykard-like boss, and something like Midir that's extremely difficult, and more so the more people you bring. Honestly, I just want the DLC to transform Elden Ring into the best game of all time. The DLC for Souls games, in my opinion, can't be separated from the quality of the base game. In a lot of them, especially Dark Souls 2, the DLC makes the base game better. You can't remove them when you're judging their quality. It's why I've been so reticent to scale Elden Ring, to say whether it's my favorite or not, because the DLC isn't here yet. And historically, the DLC is the best part of any Souls game. So, fundamentally, I guess, my hope for the DLC is that that tradition continues. That the DLC is the best of Elden Ring, and then some. And that's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching.